Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, whatever time you're watching this video asynchronously. I'm Gregg Fraley, and with me today for part two of our Is the USA Slipping Innovation series of 4 videos is Jeffrey Phillips, author of Relentless Innovation. How you doing today, Jeffrey?
Greg, I'm awesome. Looking forward to talking about the people process of innovation.
Yes, it's people today, and just a preview of coming attractions. Part 3 will be about process, and part 4 will be about culture. So people, it's the most basic thing, isn't it?
Well, as you and I were talking about before we came online, I think to me, what I tell a lot of people is this is the one function in business that can't be outsourced, it can't be automated. You want people to generate ideas, you want people to sense needs, you want them to be able to synthesize all that data and to come up with new ideas. And I think this is the one really interesting competitive advantage left where people will add a tremendous amount of value in the future.
Yeah, and it can't just be anybody, can it? I mean, one of my things about people and innovation is there's some people that are well suited to it, and there's some people that really aren't, even though they might be able to contribute in another way. Talent matters, in other
Yeah,
words.
I think there's this issue of everyone should innovate, and I think
Yes.
that's a fine mentality. But I do think that certain people definitely have stronger skills, and I do think innovation and creativity is a skill you can build. And too often we overlook that. We tend to grind innovation and creativity out of people through our educational process and through some of the things we do in business as well.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of very sincere and talented people are, their day-to-day work is operationally focused. And so
Mhm.
when you ask them to disrupt something or to change something in a dramatic way, it can be very difficult to just even accept that. Like, why are we doing this?
Well, as you and I have also talked about, and we wrote a paper about this actually in my former company. What we found is that for most people, if you go into an organization and they say, "Well, we want to innovate," they'll say, "Well, here's our best people," and a lot of times our best people are the people who are so focused on getting the work done right and done well and done efficiently, that day's work, that they're uncomfortable, to your point, disrupting or blowing up a process or a product. And a lot of times we'll find the more innovative people in an organization more on the periphery, more out on the edges. They're viewed a little bit as change agents, and that makes organizations a little uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, I have a friend, Chris Barlow, who always said that you should make sure that the people who you would normally leave out of a meeting, the mavericks and the people who talk too much or the people who are always complaining, sometimes those squeaky wheels are the best people to have involved in innovation because it's a way to challenge to channel rather their talent.
Yeah, and you use talent as a lead in. And one of the things we know, and I think you deal with a lot, I know I deal with a lot, is building skills because there's a lot of need to increase the amount of skill. We've spent a lot of time building skills in an organization around making people more efficient, making them more effective. But I don't think we've built a lot of skill in most organizations around creativity, around sensing needs, and around synthesizing all that data and allowing people to come up with interesting new ideas. That's a talent and it can be built.
It can indeed. One of the things I always suggest as a very early starting point in an innovation training program is training in basic creative problem solving.
Mm.
Everybody thinks critical analytical thinking is all it takes to innovate, but really the creativity part is often ignored. And a lot of people believe, I think it's a myth, that you can't train for creativity. And in fact, I believe you can.
Oh, I think you can train for it. And what's more, I think you can expect it. One of the other issues that when we talk about people, it's about expectations. How are people recognized, rewarded, evaluated even? If you look at the way most people in an organization are evaluated, there's no sense of evaluating people based on their creativity or their innovation skill. And what gets measured gets managed. And so if you're not measuring for innovation, if you're not measuring for creativity, if you're not rewarding for those things, then you're not going to get it.
I think you're absolutely right. Another one of our creativity and innovation colleagues, Roger Firestein, always talks about how culturally the USA is unusual, because in Korea or Japan, they're measuring the number of ideas people contribute on an ongoing basis. I think that's smart because it builds that expectation. I don't know about you, but when I do an online strategy or brainstorming session of some sort, it always seems like there's an awful lot of participation with like 20, 25% of the group, but then the rest of the group kind of just sits back and watches. And I think that kind of passivity is not really conducive to a great innovation program.
Well, from my perspective, I don't mind it. What I really want to do is find those 20 that are really engaged and engage them deeply. And if it's possible to engage the other 60 or 80% that we call lurkers, they're
Yeah.
lurking in the background, but they're not really participating.
Social loafers.
If I can, social loafers or free riders, if I can find a way to bring them on board or to motivate them, because we're back to motivations and risks. What motivates those people to create interesting new ideas, and what risks do they see if they do so? Are they recognized and brought into the group and rewarded for it, or are they shouted down? And a lot of organizations, unfortunately, you bring in a new idea to change something or create a new product, and it's looked at negatively because there's a risk and a cost associated with that, instead of being rewarded for, hey, you're helping us grow.
Which brings us to teams. So it's usually not one person, although in some organizations it is one person that comes up with the original idea. But usually in an organization, it takes multiple people to take it from idea stage to an actual product or service or big process change or business model change. So teams, and I'll start out with this statement, that I think only about 20% of teams are actually truly effective.
Well, yeah, we could get into the whole dynamics of forming, storming, norming, all those kinds of things. But I think it's especially true in an innovation context. You need people who want to be there, who are engaged, who are excited. And one of the things we haven't talked about is motivation. There's a lot of good stuff written by Daniel Pink on extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. And I think finding people who are intrinsically motivated around the problem or issue is actually more important in many cases than finding the people with the right set of skills or talents. It's that passion a lot of times, because every innovation project I've ever seen is going to run into roadblocks.
Yep.
And it's the people who are willing to scale those roadblocks, who have passion for the idea, that often are more successful than the people who are necessarily just the smartest or the best.
Motivation really matters, because motivation is what will have people break through the blocks that you're talking about, but also the blocks that are before the blocks. So if you have people between people communication problems, if you don't really care, you just say, I don't need the conflict, I'm going to walk. But if you're motivated to get something done in terms of innovation, then you'll fight through that conflict in some fashion. You'll figure a way through it. But it brings me to a point. You don't always have to use brute force cybernetics to get your team through something difficult. And that's where I think team training makes sense. And I don't mean necessarily just ropes courses and that kind of team building stuff, which by the way is interesting and can be very helpful. But I'm talking about training in innovation concepts and having teams understand like what the average process looks like, what we're shooting for, how we're going to work together, and having a leader, a team leader, who actually knows how to facilitate meetings and facilitate different parts of the process of developing ideas.
I think you're talking about something that bleeds into our next meeting as well, which is around process.
Yes.
What are we training people on? We're training them on creative problem solving. We're training them on understanding needs. We're training them on better idea generation. Eventually, what you're talking about is training on an entire set of tools and processes that make innovation a more effective activity overall. So it's both those discrete tools that matter, and it's also about the overall process that matters.
Yeah, we are leading into process, which is our next video. But before we get there, a little bit more about teams. I also think diversity is important, and all kinds of diversity. And you guys have done some interesting work on assessing team members and so forth.
Well, one of the things, thanks for that. We have done some work on what we call traits that innovators share. And some of those things are things like expression of beginner's mind, willing to look at a problem as if for the first time, or people who are more risk-taking. But the other thing that you mentioned is diversity. And I find that a lot of times innovation teams are really heterogeneous. They're all the same, you know, and what you need is more diversity. People who have worked for the organization, people who haven't, people who are younger, people who are older, people, I'll give you one example. We had a product we were working on with a medical device company, and we realized we needed people who had different abilities because some of the people using the device weren't as able as the others were. And that led to different things, not in the product, but actually in the packaging. So yeah, lots of different kind of diversity adds to idea generation and creates better innovation.
Yeah, and all kinds of diversity. So there's cognitive style, which is measurable through assessments like Foresight or the KAI, even to some degree the MBTI, which has been getting a bad rap as of late. I still think those are useful in terms of giving people insight as to their own behavior and the behavior of others. But age diversity as well. I think, you know, sometimes when the culture is very young in an organization, that's wonderful. If there's youthful energy, it's a beautiful thing. And experience does matter. You know, knowing the domain on which you're working is important in order to innovate. People always talk about, you know, out of the box thinking. Well, actually, sometimes in corporate innovation, I think you'll agree with me on this, you don't really want out of the box innovation. You want really, really well done inside the frame innovation. Sometimes those incremental innovations can make a very big difference in the marketplace. And older folks, I think, have some domain knowledge that can be really helpful in, you know, expanding your offering or improving your offering.
Well, I think to your point, everybody's perspective can matter. And a lot of times I know that we have, and I used the word heterogeneous before, when I meant was homogenous. A lot of times the groups are so homogenous that they don't create a lot of new insight. And what we want is that very broadly diverse team that
Yes.
really incorporates a lot of people to get better ideas. I think that's absolutely critical.
Yeah, bring different cultures in as well, and ringers from the outside, as you mentioned. All right, let's wrap it up with some specific recommendations. So I think one of the things we said was training in basic creative problem solving. So that would be one. What else did we mention here?
Well, I think finding the right people. Don't just assume that the people who are really good at doing the day-to-day things within the business are necessarily going to be able to translate over into doing new things. In fact, it's a different skill set. So as you said, training in those different skills and then finding people who are passionate. I'll leave with one other. I think it's really important to understand the motivations, intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic. A lot of companies are paying for ideas, and in many cases, that's a mistake. Find the people who are really intrinsically motivated to solve a problem.
And I'll add one more that we mentioned briefly, which was facilitation skills training and having a team leader who can lead. So anyway, that's number 2. Thank you, Jeffrey, for your thoughts today on the people aspect of USA Innovation. And of course, we'll have a bumper at the end of the video with our contact information. Our next video is coming up soon, probably next week, and it will focus on the process part of innovation. So, and then the final will be culture coming up later this month or next month. So thank you again, Jeffrey.
Greg, really enjoyed it. Fun to talk with you, and it's always interesting to talk about innovation.
Leave comments. Thank you very much. That's all for today.